and thanks to NWAC for inviting me to come share my research with you today. I'm going to be talking about my work and hopefully giving you some context for how this is providing an opportunity for you as individuals and for us as a climbing and skiing community to contribute to research that is going to help us understand how climate change is impacting our region. And I'm a microbial ecologist, and what that means is I study microorganisms and how they interact with each other and how they interact with their environment. And for you, the way that you might have thought about that before is your own microbiome. So the idea of the human microbiome or your gut microbiome has gotten a lot of attention in recent years and how that affects human health. Well, what I do is I study the microbiome of snow and how that's telling us something about how snow is a living thing and how it can tell us about the health of ecosystems. All right, so what I'm going to do today is, with my time, is I'm going to talk to you about these 4 questions. So what are snow algae? What do they mean for us understanding the evolution of snowpack? So that's something that we can take away from this as people who recreate in the snow. What do they mean for snow and climate change? And then what can you do? So first, what are snow algae? And so this might be a familiar picture to many of you. This is taken in the early summer in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness. And you can see that there are these patches of red. Almost everyone in this room has probably had some experience with running into red or pink snow. And we see patchiness. You can also see the snow algae sort of in layers here in these sun cups. And so that's one way in which we see snow algae present on snow. So here's another picture from Mount Hood, and this is also annual snowpack. And you can see that there's sort of a light dusting of pink, and this is really different than the snow algae we saw in the previous picture. Here's another picture from Glacier Peak where we see similar types of snow algae distributed across the snowpack, but it's much brighter. So we call these things algal blooms on the snow. And then here's a picture from the Sisters Glacier that I took where you can't really see the snow algae from this picture, but if you got down close and looked at the snow, you would see it being a light pink in color. And here's another picture that we have 2 sides of Mount Good, and the snow is different on each side of the mountain, and then we can see the snow algae presenting differently. Here it's in very distinct patches, where here it's in diffuse melt runnels. So, in the last you might see a residual snowpack hanging out in late summer, and you can also find snow algae on these things. So this is all these different ways that snow algae is presenting on snow. And you can see it on glacier snow, and you can see it even in crevasses, as well as just on the surface of glaciers, as well as in annual snowpack, which is how you might be familiar with it when you see it emerge as the snow starts to really melt in the late spring and early summer. When we look at it up close, we can see bright pink or bright red patches. Sometimes it's light pink and can even be orange. And in this particular picture, we have some light orange and light pink. And sometimes the snow is relatively pristine, and then sometimes it's littered with all kinds of other debris. So this is relatively old snow. So as you can guess, snow algae are really diverse. It's not just one thing. And so how do we study this? One of the first ways we do is we look at microscopes. And I have this cool field microscope that allows us to look at samples directly in the field, and you'll see why this is important a little bit later in my talk. And what we get is these images of different snow algae. So Chlamydomonas nivalis is a species that's very common. You might have heard of this before if you've paid any attention to snow algae in the past. But really, there are a lot of organisms, and we don't even have names for all of these things. So all 3 of these pictures I took in this last 2017 season, they're all species that I can't identify. So instead of just using a microscope, DNA methods are much more comprehensive, and they are more accurate in terms of describing what that microbiome is in the snow. And the way that the reason that these things work is because each of these species, and I have species in quotes because it's really hard to define exactly what a species is, but I'll call them species. Each one has unique DNA sequences. So if we can sequence the DNA of some of these things that we've collected, and then we go out and we grab a microbiome sample, we can match up our samples from the environment with samples from known databases, and then we can create what we call as a fingerprint. So we take this mixed population, We process our samples in the lab. This is my graduate student, Rachel Mallon, doing a bunch of different prep work with the samples. We sequence all of the DNA that she's prepped, and then we get a collection of tens of thousands of sequences from each of our samples. So our data sets, when we create these, are millions and millions of DNA sequences. And what that does is it creates a community fingerprint. So what do I do with this type of data? So this is a slide that I could talk for a long time about, so I'm just going to go over it briefly. We see a map, and this is something that you're all used to looking at. And these are a collection of 40 DNA samples that I processed from 2013 to 2016. And you can see a bunch of names of places here that are familiar to you. And these clustering, each line represents an individual sample. And so the many different groups of organisms that are in each sample of snow, it goes into determining where on this diagram each sample falls. And the clustering allows me to see which samples are similar. And so what I've been seeing in this preliminary analysis is that we have some snow algal communities that we're finding across all of the Cascades, including a sample that I have from Peru. And so these seem to be really generalist communities. And then there's some communities that I'm finding only in Washington, although there's not any real clear geographic pattern to where these are found. And sometimes you can see that their Glacier Peak samples are falling out in all three of these, in these clusters that were all collected at the same time. So we can have highly diverse communities even within a single region at a single time. So what does this mean for understanding the evolution of the snowpack? And it has something to do with the life cycle of the algae. So here's a picture of a really deep snow pit that we dug in early spring, because what we're interested in is what we might be finding in those old snow layers as this season evolves and as the snowpack evolves. And the reason this is important is because snow algae need liquid water to complete their life cycle. So this pink stuff that you see sitting on top of the snow is just one part of the life cycle. They also have a swimming life cycle, and what we believe happens, and this has been partially documented, but this is still something that is a hypothesis that we need to demonstrate with more data, but that we have an old snowpack in the summer, and then we get snow algae growing on top. And then in the fall and winter, we get new snowpack that falls on top of this, and this old snow algae, we believe, remains dormant throughout the winter. And then in the spring and summer, it undergoes a developmental process that the snow algae turn into these flagellate, these swimming cells. And then when the whole snowpack is saturated with water, or isothermal, then the snow algae these swimming cells can swim to the top of the snowpack and then reestablish themselves so that they can turn back. So when they reestablish, they can also divide, so that is how they bloom, or the communities get bigger. And then they can turn back into the red cyst stage that we see most commonly, that you're familiar with. Okay? And so this life cycle is really important. First, it can tell us something about the snowpack. So when you see the snow algae emerge, means that the meltwater has reached the last year's surface of the snow, but it also is the process by which the snow algae proliferate. And this is, like I said, it was a hypothesis, but we can also take videos with our, can you press play? With our field microscope, and this is a picture of those cysts along with a little swimming cell. And if you look really closely, you can see a little thing flipping around. That's the flagella. That's how this thing swims. And so this is a newly established snow algae community where some of the swimmers are coexisting with the red cells. And this is one of the first times I think anybody's been able to see this in the field. And if we, and I know this is true because we also were able to find, go ahead and play that we still saw an intermediate sort of swimming stage with these cells that were on the surface. So we're actually capturing the process of the swimming cells establishing as the snow algae bloom with these samples. And these were taken in early June in the Bagley Lakes area, which is an intensive study site for us. So this is right next to the Mount Baker ski area. But there's some extra complications with understanding the snow algae in this way. And what we really want to know is, with the previous data slide that I showed you, with the way that we're looking at the samples and how they're related to each other, one of the complications is that the snow algae might also be wind dispersed. And so in the late summer, when we have those spores sitting on top of snow, or if the snowpack disappears completely and the spores are found on rocks or on soil, they can be picked up and moved into the wind and into the upper atmosphere, and we think that they're dispersed in the upper atmosphere, and then they can find their way back onto the snowpack and grow. So, what does this mean for climate change? So, snow algae have been getting a lot of press recently, and this article is from the New York Times. It says watermelon snow not edible but important for climate change. This is reporting on a study that's looked at snow algae increasing melt on continental glaciers, like in Greenland. And then this study came out, this report in the New Yorker is a little bit exciting because it says the last snow you might see on Earth may be red, and this is reporting on a study in Alaska that has shown that the algae are increasing melt by up to 6 times. So snow and glaciers are melting 6 times faster with snow algae blooms than without snow algae blooms. So what can you do? My lab has developed a climber science, skier science program where I'm getting folks in this community to help me collect samples. So we've also been partnering with K-12 programs, and specifically Snow School, which is a partnership with NWAC, NCI, and the Mount Baker ski area. So those kids are helping us collect samples. But we're also getting the alpine recreation community to help us collect samples. And look at how much fun this is. These people are having lots of fun collecting samples. And we've gotten some press for this. There was an article in the Seattle Times this summer, and also one in the Cascadia Weekly last spring, discussing the citizen science program and how you can help. This is also described on my website, and I have, and what happens when you help is that you get a snow collection sample, we can mail them to you, you go out and you scoop snow into tubes, you record your GPS coordinate, and then you send them back to me, and we get really excited when we get those samples back. And this is a video of me scooping snow, but it's on YouTube, so you can look at how to do it if you're not sure. And I just wanted to show the impact of getting folks to help collect us samples. So all of the red ones are my lab, all the blue points are samples collected by citizen scientists. This is a blow-up of just Washington State. You can see that having people go out and collect samples is greatly improving the resolution we have over the Cascades. This is just one particular example. These samples were taken by 3 different citizen scientists. Here's one person, this is another person, and this is another person. They were all taken within a week of each other. These samples are great because we did not get to visit this Dome Peak region this summer with my lab group. Here's another. I'm going to skip this, and I just want to say that what you can do to help is you can grab a sample, and also you can take a picture. So even if you don't want to carry around snow sample tubes with you, if you just take a photo and you hashtag watermelon snow or snow algae, we're looking for those, and you can include the GPS coordinates of where you took your picture, which you're already taking pictures anyway because of your rad skiing and climbing. And then if you do that and you post it on Instagram, and my lab has an Instagram account, we'll be able to see where you saw pink snow. All right, and I have a lot of people to thank for funding for this project and supporting this project, and I think I have like 1 minute for questions. Oh, one other thing. I did bring sample kits and a sign-up sheet so that if you would like me to send you samples, you're not going to be able to sample until the spring, but they're at the NWAC booth.
Thanks so much, Robin. I think we'll wait. There we go. Yeah, that was awesome. Does anyone have any questions for Robin? I think we got a few, so we've got a mic that's coming around for us, back in the back.
All right. Thank you. That was really cool and interesting. So for all scientists, it's hard to get funding just because it's cool and interesting. So I was wondering how you pitch to your funders that this work is work that needs to be done.
Well, the Mazamas gave us some money this year because they liked the idea that I was engaging the climbing community. And then the other way that I've been funding this is when I write my science grants, I include this as a broader impact. So this is a way for me to communicate science, communicate climate science, and get people excited by science. But it is difficult to fund.
Great. Do we have another question or two? We've got a little bit of extra time right up here in the aisle.
With the shrinking of the snowpack in Antarctica, what are you seeing in the snowpack there?
Can you repeat the question?
With the snowpack going down in Antarctica, what are you seeing with the algae blooms down there?
So there are algal blooms there, and there are a lot of the same taxa that we see in Antarctic snow or in Greenland snow as we see in alpine snow. But what I think we're seeing is different is the community structure. So there's a lot of other things in the snow besides just algae. There's fungi and there's other protist groups that are in there, and those look like they might be different. But snow habitat seems to be relatively consistent across space. So that is, my study is the largest biogeographic study to see that to actually characterize how these communities are the same, and that will help us understand how they're dispersed. Does that
Thank you.
answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got time for another question there, Forrest.
Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. I was wondering, should we be cleaning our skis if we kind of ski or skin across these algal blooms in the alpine area? And if so,
So that's a great question, and that question sort of relates to what do we do, what does this mean? Okay, so part of what I'm doing is just documenting what's happening. So as the snow and glaciers get more melty, because we know that that is beneficial for their life cycle, they're probably going to grow more. And if they're gonna grow more, they're gonna melt the snow more, and this is a positive feedback. So in that case, we need to start thinking about snow algae on snow as a kind of a harmful algal bloom, just like we have harmful algal blooms in the ocean. And if that is the case, perhaps in the future we will be doing something like cleaning our skis before we go and spread snow algae around everywhere. People often ask me, how do I know that I'm not just looking at the impacts of people moving around the snow? And that might be the case, and with my analytical techniques, I think we'll be able to see that. So the kind of first step is to make sure that we understand what's going on, and then the next step will be mitigation strategies. What do we do about it? Should we be cleaning our skis and our boots?
Okay, we can do two more questions. Forrest, I think up here in the front there's been a couple people. There's also a mic right here that you can walk up to and ask your question. Perfect.
Two questions. Is the organism specific to certain regions, or is snow algae worldwide? And then there's the folklore of what happens when you eat it. But what's your answer?
Thank you for asking that question. So it appears that everywhere there is snow algae. I also started working in Chamonix, France this summer, and I will be going back there next year, as well as New Zealand. And there's folks working in other snowpacks around the world as well. And so my big biogeographic study will help us really say whether these things are different from place to place or whether they're all the same. And then the second question about the folklore of eating it. So the algae are green algae. They're not that different from algae that are in smoothies. I like to tell people, like when you put a little algae in your smoothie. So they're not themselves toxic. I think what makes people sick is the fungi and the other like amoebas that are in the snow that are eating the the sugar that the snow algae are fixing, because they're the primary producers for that. So it's not the algae that are the problem, it's the other things. Oh, if you get some of those amoebas, you could get sick, but it's not a guarantee. It just depends. It's hard to know.
Okay, time for one more question. We had somebody up here that had one, or, oh yeah, go ahead, Trev.
Just a simple question. Why are they red?
Oh, great question. They are red because they're actually green algae. So if you got rid of the red pigment, you would see them green. Like this little swimmers are green. They don't have their red pigment yet. The red pigment acts as a sunscreen, but it also acts as an antioxidant. Being in a high UV environment like snow creates all these free radicals within the algal cell, and so the red pigment helps to quench those.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna.